This is Extra Paycheck Podcast, episode number 107.
You're listening to Extra Paycheck Podcast, where you will learn how to build and grow your own successful online business. Now, here's your host, Alex Soul.
Welcome to yet another episode of the Extra Paycheck Podcast. This is episode number 107, and this episode marks an important milestone. The Extra Paycheck Podcast is now officially 2 years old. I launched it in the early April of 2015. Now we're April 10th, 2017. So it's been just a few days, over 2 years. And I'm really proud of the fact that I kept it going for these past 2 years. Now, throughout this time, I interviewed 70 different inspiring entrepreneurs who shared their stories, their success, their failure, their dark moments, and how they overcame those dark moments, as well as their tips, strategies, ideas on how to grow a business, ideas on how to start a business, and a lot more. And I'm pretty sure that if you've been listening to previous episodes, you've enjoyed those stories, and hopefully you got inspired just like I did by listening to these people sharing their stories. Just a few weeks ago, in episode number 100, which was another milestone, I had Pat Flynn from Smart Passive Income as a special guest to be with me on the show to celebrate 100 episodes. And it was really awesome because Pat Flynn is one of the biggest inspirations for me personally when it comes to online marketing, when it comes to online business. I was really happy to have him on where he shared his side of things. He explained how he started his business, how he grew it, and how he keeps on growing it and adding to it. Because, you know, as real entrepreneurs, we never really stop. We always have to keep pushing further. We have to go forward. We have to get on new projects, especially once we complete some other projects, because that's just the nature of things for us. We want to achieve more. We want to do more. We're curious by nature, and we want to discover more things. We want to step out of our comfort zones, which I find is really awesome. And doing this podcast and inviting all these people has been a big push for me because it is also out of my comfort zone. Like many of us, I was scared of being rejected. So whenever I invite someone to be on the podcast, still up to this day, of course, I am kind of uncomfortable a little bit because, you know, nobody likes rejection. But at the same time, I thought, well, what's the worst thing that would happen? They would say no, or they would simply not reply to my email. It's not the end of the world. That's that. They can't reply or don't want to reply. That's fine. So at this point, I would like to share some thoughts on the actual podcast. I'd like to share some thoughts on things that were really, really hard for me and things that weren't as hard. And maybe for some of you who are wondering about podcasts, or maybe you might be interested in starting your own podcast, this will certainly be helpful. So in my case, one of the biggest issues that I face with this podcast up until now, it's finding people to interview for the show. There are a lot of entrepreneurs online and offline, and the truth is that many of them don't really have a big online presence. They don't have blogs. They don't want to be public. They don't go on podcasts simply because they don't care about podcasts, or in some cases because they're scared of competition. They don't want to reveal their strategies. They don't want to talk about their business because they think that you might steal their idea and run with it, which I understand. That's fine. People are naturally scared of competitors. That's all good. So these two factors make it a lot harder to find people to invite as guests on this show. Another issue is, of course, finding contact information from any of these people. And I've noticed some of the online entrepreneurs, even the ones that are very, very visible online, they have their own podcast or their own blog, and they appear in some publications from time to time. Some of them do a really, really good job hiding their contact information. There's basically no way of getting in touch with them, or if there is, it's really, really complicated. And sometimes I would spend a few hours trying to find how to reach a certain person, and in the end I simply give up because there is no way. I even use some kind of software to try to find the information. There's nothing. So yeah, once again, finding people for the podcast and getting in touch with them is actually a lot harder than it might seem, but it is very possible. Now, I could offer you some tips on how I find entrepreneurs, because since I run my own business and I run my own websites, I don't have all the free time in the world to keep looking for people. But one of the ways I've been able to find some guests is, of course, reading blogs, going on different subreddits such as Entrepreneur. Sometimes people share their stories there and they're very receptive to being contacted through Reddit, or sometimes they even give out their email address or any other information to help you get in touch with them. So that has been very helpful. Listening to other podcasts helps as well, because you might stumble upon some guests that would be perfect for your own show. And last but not least, I've started attending a local marketing event in 2016. Here it's called MTL Plus E-commerce, and I've had quite a few amazing guests from that event alone. And it makes it a lot easier, because when you go to such a local event, you meet people, you network with them, and you get a good idea of what they're about, what their business is about, and you could actually approach them right there and ask them if they would be open to being on a podcast. And of course, most of them will say yes, because just besides the point that they like to chat about it and they like to talk about their business and share their knowledge, share their advice, they're also getting free marketing out of it. Because if someone is selling a very helpful service or a software that helps e-commerces, or that helps websites, or that helps bloggers or YouTubers, whatever that is, they want to get the word out, and they're really, really excited to be on podcasts. In case of my podcast, I'm targeting entrepreneurs and beginner entrepreneurs in the online business world. So whoever has any product or service that's related to online marketing, of course they want to be on the podcast. Of course they want to tell more people about their business and hopefully get some clients out of it. Another hard part of doing this podcast is releasing an episode every single Monday. Now, I know that I could have just released them whenever, but in my opinion and my experience, it's a lot better to actually pick a schedule and announce your release dates. So when I first launched the podcast, that's what I said to my listeners, that I will be releasing a new episode every single Monday. And I know that now every Monday people are waiting for my podcast to release. And I know that because whenever I release it, I see a lot of downloads of the show, of the specific episode, without me ever promoting it or posting any links or anything of that sort. So what happens is, as soon as I release my episode, it shows up on iTunes and people get notified. People who subscribe to my show, they get notified and they go and listen to that episode, which is really awesome. And at the same time, I see that people are waiting. They're expecting an episode from me on Monday. If I was inconsistent, I'm sure the growth of this podcast, the growth of the fan base or listeners would have been a lot smaller and slower as well, because people, as I mentioned, they expect something on a certain day and they'll be there to get it. Now, if you skip the day or if you just release your episodes randomly, people will eventually give up on you and they'll stop listening to your podcast or stop watching your videos or stop reading your blog post, whatever your content of choice is. So this has been one of my biggest tips whenever it comes to content. Pick a schedule and stick with it. Just be consistent. If you are writing 2 blog posts per week, one on Monday, one on Friday, well, keep with it. Keep that schedule and people will know that they should expect new content from you on certain dates. If you slack off, if you are not consistent, if you release new content whenever you feel like it, people simply will stop going to your blog, or they'll stop listening to your podcast, they'll stop watching your videos, because there are many other people who are consistent and who will provide content, fresh new content, whenever those people are looking for it. So keep that in mind and stay consistent. Here are some tips to help you with that, or tips that actually helped me with that, is always planning ahead. Now, I've been traveling quite a bit. I love traveling, and in 2016, I left on a trip to Asia for 4 months. Then I had another trip to USA in September, if I'm not mistaken, that I went to Ukraine for a week or two in December. this year I went to Las Vegas for a marketing conference. I went to Cuba for a week. And whenever I leave on these vacations, I can't really release my episodes, right? Because, well, you're traveling and you don't know where you're going to be on a Monday, if you're going to have internet access. And as I just mentioned, since I was in Cuba just a few weeks ago, they don't really have internet. Even if I had an episode there, I wouldn't be able to upload it. I can guarantee that. So what I do, I plan ahead. I count how many episodes I need to release or I need to have saved up or recorded in advance. And I do that before going on the trip. I record all my episodes, I write all my show notes, and then I simply schedule them. So in my case, I'm using Libsyn for hosting my podcast, and Libsyn has a function of scheduling. So I simply upload my episode, I write a description, and I schedule for it to release on a certain date. Then I write my show notes page on my blog, which is using WordPress, and WordPress has the same function. You could schedule your posts for the future. So if you really want to, you could schedule posts or videos or podcasts for years and years in advance. If you want to do that, you certainly can do that. And this has helped me a lot. Now, another thing that I've been trying to kind of get into is automation of certain things. Let me give you an example. Whenever I release a podcast episode, I also upload it on YouTube as a video. Well, there isn't actually a video, there's just an image and the audio playing in the background. And I've been doing that manually. Whenever I would release a new episode, I would create an image and then try to convert it on my computer through a software of some sort that turns all that into a video format file. Then I would upload it manually on YouTube and all that junk. And that would take a lot of time, actually. It seems like insignificant, but it would take me 20, 30, 40 minutes, sometimes an hour just for that. Now what happened with Libsyn is they introduced automatic YouTube uploading. So whenever I release an episode on Libsyn, my podcast hosting platform, they automatically convert it into a video format and they automatically upload it to my YouTube channel without any extra work for me. Now, there are other software and automation tools that I've been trying to use in order to streamline this whole process, make it faster and make it less painful. And that's something I suggest that you should look into if you're doing any kind of content, because when you automate certain tasks, in the long run, it saves you a lot of time, actually. Time that you didn't even think that you're wasting or you didn't realize that you're wasting. And all that automation is really, really helpful if done properly. There are so many tools available right now for social media, for uploading, for downloading, for releasing, scheduling, calendars. There are a lot of tools. Many of them are free, and you just have to find which tools you need and how to automate those things that you could possibly automate. So these were my two most important tips for launching a podcast or, doing any kind of content. Now, if you do want to launch a podcast, I recently wrote a second guide on how to start a podcast. Everything is covered, completely every question that you might have about releasing or launching a podcast of your own. Everything is explained, and I'll put a link in the show notes page for this episode. So if you're interested, please do check it out. It's completely free and it's very, very detailed. Now, I would keep on going with this podcast for another year at least, because as I mentioned, it's been such a blast. Simply connecting with these awesome entrepreneurs has given me a lot of motivation. And I got a lot of answers from that. I got a lot of ideas on marketing strategies and so on. So, I love doing that and I'll keep on doing that. One thing I would like to change in this podcast is I would like to get more questions for you, the listener, so I could answer them in future episodes. So if you do have any kind of questions, please head over to extrapodcast.com and go to any episode and leave a question or click on contact me button and send me an email, and I would be happy to answer your questions in future episodes of the Extra Paycheck Podcast. All right, so that's about it for this 2-year anniversary special edition episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Head over to extrapodcast.com/107 for the show notes, where I'll share some links, resources, and other things related to this specific episode. Also, head over to extrapodcast.com/iTunes and subscribe to the show if you haven't already. Leaving a review or a rating or both for the show will help tremendously. So please do that if you haven't done that already. Once again, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you next Monday.